Was this Gibson Les Paul too good to be kept in the lineup? Let's take a look. For years now, Gibson has always had two entry-level Les Pauls in the lineup. Some sort of a special tribute and a Les Paul tribute. Both of which were always satin nitro finish rather than gloss nitro finish. From there, you would move on to gloss territory. So you would have things like the Gibson Les Paul Studio, Les Paul Junior, and Les Paul Special, then some form of a Les Paul Classic, and then your Les Paul Standards. Now, to some, that seems like it's a large, inflated, and convoluted lineup of guitars. The rest of us tend to look over at Fender and how many different Stratocasters that they have and all the different levels, and then we say, maybe you can add another Les Paul or two. Earlier this year, or it could have been the end of last year, Gibson actually discontinued the Les Paul Tribute and the Les Paul Studio. These were rumored for probably a good 6 to 9 months before it happened, and there was a lot of confusion over it because at that point it looked like they hadn't even introduced the Les Paul Modern Light at that point. So it sort of seemed like, okay, well, we're gonna go from what, Epiphone to Les Paul Classics? Even those were rumored to be discontinued at some point. So it just seemed like the only ones that you could get would be the Junior, the Special, and then the Les Paul Standards. So there was a lot of confusion over that. But what ended up happening is they merged the Les Paul Tribute and the Les Paul Studio together, keeping mainly the specs from the Studio itself rather than like the maple neck of the Tribute and the 490T and R. We have the 498R or T and then the 490R. So they basically made the Studio into a satin nitro finish, which they had done in the past, and they incorporated the contoured neck heel that they have on the Les Paul Modern, and that's what they did. So they released the Modern Studio. Now you would think technically this is somewhat of like a side shift, almost to being a downgrade, because it didn't add a hard shell case. But what they ended up doing was actually like increasing the price quite a bit. So while some people out there focus on the, confusion over the fact that it's somewhat of a sidestepped downgrade with a major price increase, a lot of the rest of us out there focus on the fact that we actually lost a fantastic guitar in the lineup in the Les Paul Tribute. So that's kind of what I want to do here is kind of focus on this, because Maybe it was a great seller, maybe it wasn't. None of us work for Gibson, so we don't really know. These were ordered in mass bulk because they were like one of the entry-level Gibsons, but you can still actually find them for sale brand new in stores. The thing is, too, on the used market, there used to be, you could usually get these for like $900 to $1,000. If it's beat up, you can usually get it for like $800. Now you're actually starting to see these sell for like $1,200 to $1,300 to almost brand new price because it's a Gibson that's been discontinued. But it was around for years, so there's a whole bunch of them still out there. But regardless of price, this guitar here had a whole bunch of mojo built into it, which is honestly what Les Paul players generally look for. Mojo. So it's basically what that is something that continues to bring you back and want to play the guitar. So I'm not a big fan of satin nitro finishes, but this guitar just plays so different than all of the gloss nitro finish guitars that, yeah, you tend to keep going back to it. It has the ultra modern weight relief to it, so that means with the mahogany body, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's cut out on the other side of it before they put on the maple cap. It's a plain top, so you're not going to really find a lot of flame in them. And it had a maple neck, which to some people that's a major bonus. And to some people, it just seems a little odd because everything else in the lineup has a mahogany neck. But maple tends to feel a little on the snappy side, so you're really going to feel that if you're playing with a pick and you're hitting the A string, or if you're playing with a pick and you're playing leads. You will generally tend to notice a little bit of snap in comparison to mahogany. And it also has the 490T and the 490R pickups, which a lot of people will argue that they are. Some people will say that they're exact replicas of the patent applied for PAF pickups, which they're not. Gibson even tells you that they're not. They retain some of the originality of it, I guess you would say, but there's definitely a boost in the mid-range, and they're just ever so slightly hotter. But if you are kind of curious here, most people can't hear differences if I play one guitar and then another guitar and they play the exact same thing with the same setting. So yeah, I'm gonna do that, but what you want to listen for is the mid-range in this guitar, and then I'll probably grab a 1958 VOS, so the upper end, so the high end in that. So I'll make sure to play something with a little bit of high end there. So you're gonna hear that that's a little sweeter with less focus on that upper mid-range than the 490T and 490R. So to most people, that sounded basically the exact same, but if you're listening for the specific nuances and the differences, you heard it. The big thing here is there's a major price difference. So these brand new, Canadian at least, are like $200. The custom buckers are like $400 each. That's the price each for each of the pickups. So there's definitely a major price difference. Whether that difference matters to you or whether you just want to, offset that by changing your amp settings, that's really up to you. It's all a personal preference. So the thought amongst a lot of us out there is that this was eating into the profits of the Les Paul Studio. And then the Les Paul Studio was eating into the profits of the Classic. Because the Classic now has push-pulls. The Studio now has push-pulls. Right? The Tribute here is a fantastic guitar. And it's cheaper than the Studio. So that's the thought among most of us, that, you know what, this was such a good seller and the pricing just didn't make the most amount of sense. But here's something else to think about. There are a lot of players out there that don't like Gibson. A lot of it has to do with pricing. A lot of it has to do that they're like kind of a historic company. They focus on, previous models from the 50s. Rather than, doing a lot of innovation. There has been innovation over the years, but they haven't traditionally done too well in the innovation area. Robot tuners, anybody, right? So if you look at it now, Gibson can say that they're kind of dipping their toe in to modernizing their guitar. So a lot of modern players now like satin finishes. That checks it. They like having that contoured heel, checks a box, and they like things like locking tuners. Not on the Studio, on the modern Studio, but they like cosmic black hardware. That's on the Studio. A lot of people are shifting to gig bags over hard shell cases. Studio, modern Studio, got it. But at the same time, it's not a multi-fret guitar, it's not a multi-scale guitar. It still retains the original Gibson scale. It still has a headstock. It doesn't have like a Floyd Rose or an Evertune bridge. So it's baby steps. Again, the thought is, hey, they're a business. They're dipping their toe in, because if they came out with something like if they took the headstock off the Les Paul, gave it an Evertune bridge, and gave it a whole bunch of other weird features that historic Gibson players don't really like, then that might be the robot tuners all over again. So they kind of have to dip their toe in. But at the end of the day, we've lost an absolute legend in the Les Paul lineup, and it's very, very unfortunate. So here's to the Gibson Les Paul Tribute. We'll take one final listen to it.